we're stripping away that whole cinematic movie montage fantasy of personal transformation today. We are looking at how to achieve extraordinary personal growth without triggering that biological panic button and, without the inevitable burnout that always follows.
Which is so critical for actually making things stick.
Totally. And our map for this is a series of excerpts from this really compelling YouTube audiobook. It's titled Kaizen Mastery, Incremental Improvement for Personal Growth.
Yeah, that source material is incredibly practical.
It really is. We are going to extract basically a stress-free toolkit from this philosophy. The mission is to help you transform inevitable setbacks into leverage and, tackle goals you might currently think are entirely out of your league.
So to really grasp the mechanics of this, we have to look at the psychological friction of change.
Right, the resistance we all feel.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is, the term Kaizen translates to change for the better, but its origins are just intensely practical.
It didn't come from a Silicon Valley tech startup.
No, not at all. It actually emerged during the economic rebuilding of post-war Japan. The strategy wasn't to implement these massive overnight industrial revolutions.
Because they just couldn't do that at the time.
Right. The entire framework relied on a relentless microscopic accumulation of tiny improvements. And what makes this philosophy so universally applicable today is how perfectly it maps onto human neurobiology.
Okay, let's unpack this, because you're saying it fits perfectly with how our brains actually work.
Yeah, because we are fundamentally wired to maintain homeostasis.
Yeah.
We crave predictability because, from an evolutionary standpoint, predictability means safety.
So when you decide on a Sunday night, I'm going to wake up 3 hours earlier to run 5 miles, your prefrontal cortex is thrilled. That's the logical, goal-setting part of your brain.
It loves a good plan.
Right. But your amygdala, that primitive threat detection center, it detects this massive deviation from your baseline. It sees that sudden structural instability as a literal threat to your survival.
Yeah, it immediately triggers a stress response. Cortisol levels spike, your executive function narrows, and you experience this profound cognitive resistance to whatever new behavior you're trying to force.
Which is when you just hit snooze 5 times and hate yourself.
Exactly. Most people interpret this as a personal failure or, a lack of discipline. But in reality, your brain is functioning exactly as it was designed to.
It's actively defending you from a chaotic, sudden change in your environment.
Spot on. And this is where the core mechanism of Kaizen becomes so vital. By focusing on incredibly small, almost laughable changes, you slip entirely under the amygdala's radar.
You're flying beneath the threat detection system.
Precisely. You're making an update to the system that is so tiny that the algorithms don't even register it.
It's the difference between trying to install an entirely new, completely untested operating system on your computer while you're in the middle of a massive project.
That is a recipe for a total crash.
Right, versus allowing a tiny, 2 kilobyte background patch to just download quietly while you work. The massive install crashes the system, but the background patch goes entirely unnoticed.
That's a perfect analogy.
But wait, let's look at the actual application of this, because the Kaizen framework suggests starting with steps like committing to just 5 minutes of focused work without distractions.
Yep, 5 minutes.
Honestly, if my goal is to write a novel or learn a complex coding language, scheduling 5 minutes a day feels like a complete cop-out.
I get that.
It feels like I'm just procrastinating with extra steps to avoid the actual grueling work required to achieve anything meaningful. Are we just coddling ourselves here?
Well, that reaction makes total sense if you're evaluating the 5 minutes purely on output.
Right, because 5 minutes of typing isn't getting me a book anytime soon.
Obviously not. You can't write a novel in 5-minute daily increments without it taking decades. But the output isn't the point of the initial micro step.
Wait, really? Then what is the point?
The purpose is to lower the activation energy required to initiate a task. In chemistry, activation energy is the minimum amount of energy required to start a reaction.
Okay.
For human behavior, the hardest part of any task is just crossing that threshold from doing nothing to doing something.
Oh, getting off the couch.
Yes. When you set the bar at 5 minutes, you remove the anticipation of pain and fatigue. You completely eliminate the dread.
Because anyone can do 5 minutes. You stop negotiating with yourself. You don't have to psych yourself up for a 5-minute task.
You really don't. And what happens neurochemically is pretty profound. Every time you effortlessly complete that tiny 5-minute task, your brain releases a microdose of dopamine.
You secure a victory.
Exactly. Over a few weeks, You begin to decouple the concept of work from the feeling of overwhelming stress.
Oh, wow. So you're rewiring the association itself.
You're building the specific psychological muscle of starting. You fundamentally alter your self-image from someone who procrastinates to someone who consistently executes.
That makes a lot of sense. So that low friction consistency is the required foundation before you can even think about scaling up the intensity.
Without that foundation, you just crumble.
Okay, so the tiny steps bypass the alarm system and they lower the activation energy. But I mean, doing 5 minutes of work randomly on a Tuesday doesn't actually change your life.
No, it doesn't.
Right. And you have a chaotic schedule. You've got endless emails, unexpected crises. Relying on yourself to simply remember to take this tiny step every single day introduces a whole new layer of cognitive load.
Which brings us to the next massive piece of the puzzle.
So what does this all mean for daily life? At what point does this become a permanent trait rather than just like a temporary experiment?
Well, the transition from an isolated experiment to an automatic behavior requires what behavioral psychologists call anchoring. And this is heavily emphasized in the Kaizen methodology.
Anchoring. Okay, how does that work?
If you simply tell yourself, I need to do my 5 minutes of mindfulness today, you are forcing your brain to carve out a brand new slot in an already packed schedule.
You have to expend conscious energy to remember it and then actually do it.
Exactly. Anchoring bypasses this by piggybacking the new, tiny habit onto an action that is already deeply hardwired into your daily routine.
So you attach it to a behavior that happens on autopilot anyway. The framework uses the example of brushing your teeth, right?
Right. It's a classic example for a reason.
If your Kaizen goal is a minute of mindfulness, you don't schedule an ambiguous calendar block. You decide that the physical act of putting your toothbrush back in the holder is the absolute trigger for your 1 minute of mindfulness.
You are physically leveraging existing neural pathways. In neuroscience, there's a principle known as Hebb's law. It basically says that neurons that fire together wire together.
Wow, okay.
By consistently pairing the new action immediately with a deeply ingrained habit, the synaptic connection between the two strengthens really rapidly.
So eventually, just finishing brushing your teeth automatically prompts you to be mindful. The cognitive load just drops to near zero.
It does. It becomes second nature.
It's kind of like reaching escape velocity. You know, a rocket uses 90% of its fuel just breaking through the atmosphere in those first few minutes because gravity and air resistance are at their absolute peak.
That's a lot of friction.
It takes a terrifying amount of explosive force just to get off the launch pad, but once it hits orbit, it just shuts the engines off. It coasts at 17,000 miles an hour in a totally frictionless environment.
That's exactly it. Anchoring gets you into orbit quickly so you don't burn through your daily supply of willpower.
And to make sure you actually stay in orbit, the text highlights this super specific tactic. Visual tracking, even just a simple check mark.
It might seem trivial, but it serves a vital psychological function. It provides immediate, tangible evidence of your consistency.
Like tracking a streak on an app.
Yes. When you look at a visual streak of completed microactions, you experience what psychologists call the endowed progress effect. You feel a sense of accumulated investment.
And breaking that streak feels like a loss.
Exactly. Which artificially motivates you to keep the momentum going on those days when you just feel sluggish.
Okay, so you have this frictionless momentum, your habits are anchored, you are tracking the streak. Eventually, inevitably, you're going to hit a wall.
Oh, without a doubt. Barriers are guaranteed.
Right. You are going to take your tiny daily step and realize you are totally lost or the results are completely plateauing. And momentum in the wrong direction is just efficiently getting lost.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the exact moment most personal growth initiatives just collapse.
We are so optimized for moving forward, but we are terribly unequipped for diagnosing why we've stalled.
The Kaizen philosophy dictates that consistent action without consistent measurement is completely useless. You have to establish a robust feedback loop.
Like a compass on a ship.
Exactly. A feedback loop is simply the deliberate cycle of taking action, gathering data on the result of that action, and then adjusting your next step accordingly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The framework is incredibly specific about the type of data you need to gather. It insists on both quantitative and qualitative feedback.
Yes, and that distinction is huge.
Quantitative makes sense to everyone. It's the hard metrics. Did I complete the 5 minutes? Did I write the 100 words? How much did my website traffic actually grow?
And high achievers absolutely love quantitative data because it's clean, it's binary, it's easy to chart.
But the problem is that quantitative data only tells you what happened, not why it happened or if it's even sustainable.
This is where qualitative reflection becomes absolutely mandatory. It requires you to track your subjective experience.
Like, how drained did you feel after that task? Did you experience acute anxiety when the project parameters suddenly changed?
Or are you noticing a subtle shift towards resentment in your daily workflow? And high achievers often actively suppress this qualitative data because it feels messy. It feels subjective and distracting.
It feels like complaining to yourself instead of just pushing through.
Exactly. But suppressing it is catastrophic for long-term growth.
So if your quantitative metrics look fantastic for a whole month, but your qualitative data shows rapidly increasing exhaustion and cynicism, what is that telling you?
Your feedback loop is screaming at you that a massive crash is imminent. The system is begging you to adjust your parameters before you hit a critical failure.
It's essentially the telemetry on a self-driving car.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the cameras and sensors are constantly feeding the processor data about lane drift, speed, and obstacles.
Right, taking in the environment.
When an obstacle suddenly appears, say like a closed road or unexpected construction, the car doesn't just stubbornly accelerate into the barricade because that was the original route.
It would be totaled.
Right. It instantly takes in the new environmental data, recalculates the path of least resistance, and adjusts the steering. But human beings have this bizarre tendency to treat barriers as moral failures.
We really do. We view external barriers like a sudden budget cut or internal barriers like a spike in imposter syndrome as signs that we shouldn't even be attempting the goal in the first place.
We just want to give up.
But the Kaizen approach completely neutralizes the emotional weight of barriers by treating them as neutral data points that simply require a micro solution.
Okay, let's look at a deeply ingrained internal barrier, like the persistent intrusive thought of, I am simply not smart enough to pull off this career pivot.
That's a very common one. And the traditional self-help industry tells you to stand in front of a mirror and aggressively yell affirmations at yourself to just demolish that limiting belief overnight.
Like you can just brute force a massive psychological shift.
Which almost guarantees a backfire effect. Your brain violently rejects the affirmation because it lacks concrete evidence. And that leaves you feeling even more incapable.
So applying Kaizen to this internal barrier means dismantling it microscopically. You don't try to cure your imposter syndrome today.
No, you set a goal to challenge that specific limiting thought exactly once during your workday.
That's worse.
Yes. When the thought arises, you calmly counter it with one single, undeniable piece of historical evidence of your competence. Like, I figured out the complex database migration last year, therefore I have the capacity to learn this new software.
You introduce a tiny, irrefutable data point. You take this massive, opaque psychological wall and you turn it into a tiny puzzle you solve once a day. You're chipping away at the foundation of the belief instead of trying to knock the wall down with your bare hands.
And as you navigate these barriers, both internal and external, you encounter the most insidious threat to the entire process.
Oh boy.
It's a threat that usually masks itself as extreme productivity, the refusal to rest.
Oh, hustle culture. It tells us that any time spent not actively pushing the needle forward is wasted time. We literally equate physical and mental exhaustion with dedication.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of human physiology. Sustainable change demands a rigid, non-negotiable balance between stress and recovery.
It's a biological absolute.
It is. Think about the autonomic nervous system. You have the sympathetic nervous system, which drives your fight or flight response.
That's what gets us going.
Right. It mobilizes energy, heightens alertness, and pushes you to execute. This is the state you're in when you are fiercely pursuing a goal. Then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. This is when your heart rate slows, cortisol drops, and cellular repair actually occurs.
And you literally cannot stay in a sympathetic state indefinitely. If you try to just keep pushing, essentially inhaling without ever exhaling, you trigger allostatic overload.
The physiological wear and tear compounds until your systems begin to shut down. This raises an important question about how we view burnout.
Burnout isn't a lack of motivation, is it?
Not at all. It is a neurological and physiological failsafe. Your body forcefully powers down the system to prevent fatal damage.
Wow.
And the real tragedy of burnout is that it actively erodes the neural pathways and habits you've worked so hard to build, you actually regress.
So the Kaizen framework treats rest not as a reward for hard work, but as a critical scheduled mechanism for consolidation.
The time you spend completely disengaged from your goal is the exact time your brain is physically rewiring itself to make your new skills permanent.
It's when the magic actually happens. And if you can master that rhythm, the micro steps, the feedback loops, the scheduled recovery, you unlock what is arguably the most powerful mathematical force in the universe.
The compound effect.
Yes, it is like the phase transition of personal growth. Usually when we think of improvement, we think linearly. If I learn 10 new vocabulary words today and 10 tomorrow, I have 20. It's additive.
But Kaizen operates on exponential compounding.
The math behind a 1% daily improvement is the ultimate aha moment. A 1% improvement is so microscopic, it's almost impossible to perceive in real time.
It feels like you are standing completely still.
Right. But if you actually improve by just 1% every single day, the compounding nature of that growth dictates that you will be 37 times better by the end of a single year.
Not 37% better.
37 times better. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill.
And the mechanism behind this exponential leap is that your improvements do not exist in a vacuum. You are not repeatedly improving upon your day one baseline. You are constantly improving upon your newly elevated day 80 baseline. Every tiny skill you acquire fundamentally alters your capacity to acquire the next skill.
It's like algorithmic machine learning.
No, that's a great way to look at it.
And AI doesn't just passively store new data. It uses every new piece of data to aggressively refine the very algorithms it uses to process the next piece of data.
It becomes exponentially faster at learning how to learn.
Exactly. Let's ground this in a real-world scenario from the text. Imagine your Kaizen focus is entirely on radically improving your sleep hygiene. You make tiny adjustments like optimizing room temperature, cutting screen time 1% earlier each week.
The linear result is simply that you sleep better. But the compounded result is that your baseline cognitive function and emotional regulation increase significantly during the day.
Because you are no longer burning massive amounts of mental energy just trying to stay awake and manage your irritability. You suddenly have this surplus of executive function. You can seamlessly channel that newly discovered surplus into mastering a complex project at work.
Which leads to a promotion.
Which reduces your financial stress, which improves your sleep even further. The single tiny improvement in sleep hygiene cascaded into an exponential life upgrade.
You leverage past gains to drastically reduce the friction of future challenges.
It's incredible.
It really is. And as this compounding process accelerates, you arrive at the final paradigm shift detailed in the Kaizen framework.
The ultimate goal.
Yes. It is the transition from implementing Kaizen as a set of discrete tactics to embodying Kaizen as a core identity.
You shift from doing it to being it. You stop compartmentalizing growth. It's no longer something you do from 6:00 to 7 a.m. at the gym or during a dedicated study block.
You start viewing every interaction, every delay, every frustrated email as an ongoing real-time opportunity for microscopic improvement.
But doesn't viewing every single moment as a chance for improvement sound exhausting? Like, aren't we going to burn out again?
It sounds like it, but this shift relies heavily on System 1 versus System 2 thinking.
Remind us how that works.
System 2 is your slow, deliberate, conscious effort. It's exhausting. When you start the Kaizen journey, you are using System 2 to remember to take your tiny steps and track your feedback loops.
It takes effort.
But as the compound effect takes hold and neural pathways heavily myelinate, meaning the electrical signals in your brain travel significantly faster, these behaviors migrate to System 1.
They become unconscious, automatic, and incredibly low energy. You don't have to force yourself to look for inefficiencies or opportunities for growth.
Your brain just naturally highlights them as a background process. The cognitive load drops to a fraction of what it was, allowing you to sustain a mindset of continuous improvement without the mental fatigue.
It just becomes your automatic operating system.
Exactly. And this creates a profound, almost sociological byproduct that the Kaizen philosophy identifies. It creates a radical expansion of empathy.
Which seems super counterintuitive. You would think that becoming highly optimized and hyper-focused on continuous growth would make you incredibly impatient with people who are moving slowly or making obvious mistakes.
It does the exact opposite. When you deeply internalize the Kaizen reality, that true, lasting change is agonizingly slow, entirely dependent on navigating invisible internal barriers, and prone to endless plateaus, You project that understanding outward.
Oh, I see.
You recognize that the frustrating colleague or the slow-moving family member isn't necessarily lazy or malicious. They are likely trapped in a cycle of high-friction, unanchored behavior, battling their own amygdala responses.
You suddenly see the invisible cognitive drag everyone else is fighting against. You stop judging them for not instantly transforming, and you naturally develop the patience required to help them navigate their own micro steps.
Your personal growth fundamentally alters the emotional architecture of your relationships. It creates an environment where everyone around you is subtly permitted to lower their own defensive barriers.
Because continuous improvement becomes contagious, not through demanding excellence, but by modeling sustainable, low-friction progress.
That is the real mastery.
So we have dismantled the cinematic montage and replaced it with a fiercely practical toolkit.
A toolkit that actually works.
Right. You neutralize your brain's evolutionary panic button by shrinking the first step until it is utterly unthreatening. You secure that behavior into orbit by anchoring it to a deeply ingrained physical habit.
You navigate the inevitable plateaus by building objective feedback loops.
Rigorously prioritizing the messy qualitative data to prevent an internal collapse. You remember to exhale, honoring the biology of the parasympathetic nervous system by scheduling aggressive recovery.
And you trust the ruthless exponential math of the compound effect to transform your baseline reality.
And you do all of this with the liberating understanding that there is literally no finish line.
The absence of a final perfect state isn't a life sentence of endless labor. It is the realization that your potential is genuinely limitless. You're constantly expanding the frontier of your own potential.
It is the shift from obsessing over an endpoint to mastering the engine of progress itself. But, the source material leaves us with one incredibly precise final thought as it closes.
Oh, yes.
The direction problem.
Exactly. It points out that as you refine this engine of Kaizen, as you guarantee that you are constantly moving forward 1% every single day, you suddenly face a new complex problem. A powerful engine can drive you perfectly in the wrong direction if you aren't paying attention.
You need to know where you're going.
The text notes that you must develop a complementary skill: critical thinking. So we leave you with this to mull over today. If Kaizen is the relentless, unstoppable engine that guarantees your forward momentum, how might you sharpen your critical thinking to serve as the headlights, illuminating exactly which 1% of improvement actually matters most?